Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner, and today's last day before the Tour de France starts in 2023. I want to talk about 3 riders and 2 of the top professional cycling teams in the world who are going to excite this race starting tomorrow, July 1st at the Tour de France Stage 1. Now, the 3 riders. Why do I want to bring up these 3? Well, it's Marc Solerism. How can I not talk about UAE Team Emirates, Marc Soler? Do you guys remember all the way back in Tour of Spain in 2019, Stage 9, when Marc Soler's going solo up the road? His director sportif from Movistar tells Marc Soler, Mark, you got to back off the gas. You have to go back for Nairo Quintana because we want to put him in the race leader's red jersey at the Vuelta a España. Well, Mark just loses it. Hands are flaring all over the place. Head shaking like crazy. Finally, he obeys the director sportif's orders, goes back for Nairo Quintana, pulls him all the way to second on the stage, and puts Nairo Quintana into the race leader's red jersey at the Vuelta a España. And guys, it's a Spanish team. This is why he is called Marc Solerism up here on Beyond the Coverage, and certainly oftentimes on the Butterfly Effect, because there's this bubble that goes around Marc Soler that just seems to cause chaos throughout his own team. That is really how you get the ism put into Marc Solerism, is when you start doing crazy tactical stuff, when hands are flying in the air, when there's head shakes all over the place, but especially when you're doing damage to your own team. Now, I can fast forward. We can go up to the following year there in European Peloton when we're talking about racing at the Tour of Romandy. I believe it was Stage 6. Marc Solerism goes solo to the line, shushes the whole crowd there because there's been a lot of pressure put on Movistar before that whole season building up to the Grand Tours that they haven't been performing well, so Marc Soler shushing the crowd. But the Solerism here didn't affect the team a whole lot that day because they got the stage win. But when you're sishing the crowd, you got to understand the reason why he's able to go up and get that stage at Tour of Romandy is because back in the group, it was a large size of GC favorites back there, and Ineos were down to just Richie Porte and Geraint Thomas. So Ineos had no choice but to let somebody go up the road. So they picked the weakest rider in that group who could still strong enough to add that little pressure to get the gap on the group, and then other teams have to chase. So Richie Porte, Geraint Thomas can sit back. They can give up 20, 30 seconds there to Marc Solerism because they know they can take it back on the next stage or the stage after that, and certainly in the individual time trial at Tour of Romandy. So he's not a threat. But this is where I love talk about Marc Soler because he always sees the race in a bit different than I do. If I take you back to that 2019 Vuelta Stage 9, I'll show you who won the stage. That was Tadej Pogacar. He rides for UAE Team Emirates, and that year in 2019 was his coming out party at the Grand Tours. He won his first stage there after Marc Soler sat up and went back for Nairo Quintana. That gave Tadej Pogacar his first Grand Tour victory, and then he got 2 more in that 2019 Vuelta a España. So when we move a little bit closer to this year's 2023 Tour de France, let's back it up just 1 year and go 2022 for Marc Soler. Well, we're talking about Catalonia. Remember that stage at Catalonia? Almeida is in the race leader's jersey. We got Sergio Higuita up the road. He's got Richard Carapaz for company, and the peloton behind being led from UAE Team Emirates. They can't bring these guys back. Solerism freaks out, has a meltdown before the top of the last final climb, goes back to the director sportif, grabs a bottle, starts eating and drinking, and drops out of the race, leaving his teammates up there, Almeida, to lose the race leader's jersey to Higuita that went on to win Tour of Catalonia that year, and gave the stage victory to Richard Carapaz. So Almeida went from first on general classification to third. That is the Solerism. Now, we fast forward up to last year's Tour de France, 2022 again. That was just Catalonia a few months before last year's Tour de France. We go to Stage 11, the famous Stage 11, Col de Telegraph, Col de Galibier, Col de Granon, and then Tadej Pogacar has the bunk going up the Col de Granon and loses last year's Tour de France. Well, we back it up to the Col de Telegraph. It was Soler back there that was battling with Tish Benoot on who was going to dominate the front of the peloton. Well, Marc Soler, you don't need the front of the peloton. If Tish Benoot wants to set a hard tempo at the front of the group, let him set a hard tempo and just slot in there, stay on the wheel, and don't do anything. When they go over the top of the Telegraph and we see the big attack from Primoz Roglic, Jonas Vingegaard going up the road, Tadej Pogacar going up the road, and we got Marc Soler back there with Geraint Thomas, who's again having a meltdown because Geraint Thomas won't pull through. So then what does G. Thomas do? Well, he jumps him, goes across to the 3 leaders, and we all know what happens going up to the Galibier, right? Again, Marc Solerism back there chasing like crazy. Bridges across, leaves Brandon McNulty, leaves Rafael Majka, his 2 teammates back there, bridges up to the front group there with Tadej Pogacar, and then what does he do? He goes straight to the front and starts pulling. All you got to do is sit back there and go, well, Jumbo-Visma want to keep pulling up here on the front. I'll just stay back here, keep my legs fresh, wait for my teammates to come back on and finish this off. Well, the whole reason why I'm bringing up the Solerism is because, of course, he's on the UAE team roster for tomorrow's Tour de France Stage 1 start in the Basque Country. So, what do UAE Emirates believe that Soler can bring to the team? There is a lot of things that a rider as strong as Marc Soler can do. Let me remind you guys, he won a stage of the Tour of Spain earlier than last season in the early first week there of the Tour of Spain. And he did it by being up the road in the breakaway. Again, not helping his teammates out, but they needed stage wins, not GC. So you know the rider is strong. You know from last year's Tour de France at stage 11, when he goes up over the Col de Telegraph and there for most of the Tour de Galibier, you know he's got some form. So that's why you want him. I've had teammates that have incredible amount of power and then they have a Solerism around them where they just think going up the road is helping their teammates back there. But it wasn't in the case of last year's Tour de France Stage 11. It wasn't in Catalonia, but just a few months before last year's Tour de France. And in that famous Stage 9 of 2019 Vuelta a España, it was definitely necessary for Marc Soler to drop back for Nairo Quintana to put the Colombian rider into the race leader's red jersey. So I bring it up because Tadej Pogacar, UAE Team Emirates, as you guys know, he's number 1 on my list to win this year's Tour de France, and UAE Team Emirates are going to need all their guys on the right page. So if I'm there and I'm Tadej Pogacar and I see Marc Soler on the roster, I don't have a problem with it as long as I know I have the experience to tell Marc Soler exactly what to do, when to do it, how hard to go, how easy to go, when to grab bottles, when to come back, and tell him you don't do anything aggressive without the strict permission from me or one of the DSs in the car. You stay near my side the whole time because a rider like Marc Soler on last year's Stage 11 of the Tour de France could have salvaged everything with the right tactics if he had just waited for his teammates to come back on. They have 4 UAE Team Emirates up there. They pace an easy pace after Jumbo-Visma can no longer drop anyone going up the Col de Galibier. Well, they ride over the top of the Galibier, go down the descent. The whole time they're feeding Tadej Pogacar back there, and he's ready to go up the Col de Granon, fully fueled and ready to win last year's Tour de France. That's why I like the guy, and when I'm talking to his director sportif, Machine, he says everybody on the team likes Marc Soler. Clearly, they just got to get his tactics under control. Now, there's one of the comments that was left a few days ago, and it was left from Zonder0901. He left a great comment that said, Wout gets a pretty long leash because he wins a lot, but the Van Aertism should be looked at similar to the Solerism because when the tactics clearly don't align with the team's GC objectives, how do we not put Wout Van Aert, throw him into isms? Well, let's look at last year's Tour de France. Okay, we look at Stage 2. Van Aertism, he's racing for himself, trying to win stages. He could crash, be one strong, incredible man down later to try to help Jumbo-Visma win the Tour de France. Stage 3, same scenario. Stage 4, remember that last climb to summit with about 12 kilometers to go when Wout Van Aert looked back, saw his teammate Jonas Vingegaard back there with Adam Yates. Clearly, he could just back off the throttle a little bit, grab Jonas Vingegaard, go to the line, and gain time on Tadej Pogacar. If you didn't see it live on stage 4 of last year's Tour de France, you should have caught it on the Netflix Unchained series that just came out before this year's Tour de France. And then you would see in the pit area, after Tadej Pogacar was warming down, when he was thanking Wout van Aertism for dropping his teammates so he didn't lose any time to Jonas Vingegaard before the top of that climb, because he caught him just on the descent, and it kept all of the GC favorites intact. Now we go into stage 5, the cobblestone day, for the Wout van Aertism effect. Well, he crashed early, and then it still looked like he was trying to go for a stage victory when we saw Jonas Vingegaard there have bike problems and do the magical bike changes amongst his two teammates and with his car. And then finally we see Wout van Aert go back there, and he saves the day. So Zander 0901, you are 100% correct, and thanks for pointing it out to us up here on Beyond the Coverage and the Butterfly Effect, because the Wout van Aertism on last year's stage 5 of the cobblestones was in full display. But then when you see the last kilometers where the Wout van Aertism pulls 100%, looks like he saves the day, only costs 13 seconds to Jonas Vingegaard to Tadej Pogacar's time in front. But when you look at it just from the point of the view of the camera, what you always see is, wow, that's Wout van Aert in the front there. He saved the Tour de France GC for Jonas Vingegaard, even though if you look a little bit deeper, it was Primož Roglič that crashed going through the roundabout, hitting the hay bale and dislocating his shoulder. If Wout van Aert was on the front leading the train through all the cobblestones instead of at the back of the peloton chatting back there when he crashed, maybe you would have had Primož Roglič at the front. Maybe you would have had Jonas Vingegaard solidly at the front and looked after, and instead of losing 13 seconds, you would have been on the same time. Now we fast forward one more stage and we go stage 6. Wout van Aertism in full effect as he's going solo the last final kilometers until he gets caught with about 30K to go. Blows up. Guess who wins the stage? Tadej Pogacar does, and gains time bonuses on the last year's Tour de France winner, Jonas Vingegaard there. So that was a big hit. And I got to agree, every time with Xander when he brings it up, if you look closely at Wout van Aertism's and we start looking at this year's Tour de France, stage 1, what's going to happen if stage 1 looks like stage 4 of last year's Tour de France when they're hitting the last climb? It's going to summit with 10 kilometers to go. Tadej Pogacar, for the sake of conversation here, let's say his wrist is completely healed. Let's say his victory at the individual time trial championships there in Slovenia and the road championship win that he got. Let's just say there wasn't any competition. Let's say he wasn't spectacular on those days. And let's say that even though he's not good there, we come here into stage 1 and he lights everybody up on this final climb and starts going over the top of this climb with 10 kilometers to go. And let's say Wout van Aert's just right behind on his wheel there and they go over the top together. Will Wout van Aert give up stage 1 victory and a race leader's yellow jersey that dropped back for Jonas Vingegaard? Well, that's what I'm wondering. That's the drama that I'm looking forward to in stage 1. Tadej Pogacar, he lights it up on that final climb. Maybe Jonas Vingegaard is in the wrong position when that climb starts, like Tadej Pogacar was on stage 4 of last year's Tour de France. Can't make up the distance. Tadej Pogacar, because he can handle his bike fantastic, goes into that climb, summits the top with only Wout van Aert sitting on his wheel. Will Wout van Aert drop or not? I don't know. I can't tell you. It's the Van Aertism, and that's why Mark Soler has a little company on the first page for the isms going around in the professional peloton, because now there's 2 up there, so keep a close eye on stage 1. One other rider I want you guys to pay attention to, because it's my man Victor Campenaerts. He's starting his 2nd Tour de France. Remember, he's won a stage at the Giro d'Italia back a couple years in fine, strong fashion. Now, you can say sometimes you can look at my man Victor Campenaerts and say, well, there's a little Victor Campenaertism there. But the difference with Vic is when he's going up the road, it's never putting any kind of difficulty on his team back there. He's trying to go early and try to get it in a jump so that when the favorites attack 10, 15, 20 kilometers later, they come up to my man Victor Campenaerts, and now all of a sudden Lotto Destiny has a shot at possibly winning a Grand Tour this year's Tour de France. Victor Campenaerts, his tactics look like they could be a little bit of ism in there, but it's always just himself doing the work, and it's never hurting his teammates back there, and it's always trying to just add a slight percentage of a chance of winning that particular day, that he's throwing in attack a little bit too early because he knows he just can't go when all the big favorites go. So keep an eye out for my man Victor Campenaerts, because I'm excited that he's in this year's Tour de France. I'm excited. Mark Solerism is in, and I'm definitely excited and very, very ready to see how stage 1 plays out for the Wout van Aertism when we're talking about Jumbo-Visma. There's only 2 isms in the whole peloton. UAE Team Emirates have one, and Jumbo-Visma have one, and stage 1 of the Tour de France starts tomorrow. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next edition of the Butterfly Effect after tomorrow, stage 1 of the 2023 Tour de France.